All right, DC fans, here we go. We're off and running today to talk about the future of the DCU, specifically the future that is this year in 2026, the upcoming projects, Supergirl, Lanterns, and Clayface, and how important they are for the future of the DCU. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Digital Charcuterie. My name is James. Thank you so much for stopping by. If you're a fan and looking forward to the future of the DCU, hit that subscribe button because I talk about it and discuss it with you guys all the time right here on the channel. And today we got a lot to discuss and unpack. We got to talk Supergirl, Lanterns, Clayface, the Netflix, Warner Brothers, Paramount, what is going on? What lies ahead for the future of the DCU? So here's the thing about the DCU right now, and this is where I feel like a lot of the discourse is either weirdly panicked or weirdly dishonest, depending on who you're listening to. We're technically a little over a year in, we've had a handful of releases, and if you zoom out for 2 seconds instead of living on Twitter timelines and engagement bait thumbnails, the truth is the DCU has kind of worked so far. Not flawlessly, of course, not without friction, but enough that the foundation actually feels real this time, which already puts it ahead of about 3 separate, this will definitely work, guys, eras DC has tried to sell us in the past. Creature Commandos came out and was quietly very solid, like the kind of project that doesn't break the internet, but absolutely tells you whether the people running the kitchen know how to season the food. Superman 2025 came in and for a lot of people did exactly what it needed to do, which was remind audiences why Superman matters without turning him into a punchline or a think piece or a brand exercise. And then Peacemaker season 2 came and that one did not land for everyone, and that's fine to acknowledge because pretending every swing is a home run is how you end up sounding like a PR account instead of a human being. But even with that mixed bag, the DCU's core promise has mostly held up thus far, which is that this universe isn't supposed to feel like one giant factory line where everything has the same tone, the same rhythm, the same joke cadence, and the same emotional beats. James Gunn has been extremely annoying about saying that in the way that only someone who deeply believes something can be annoying about it. And up to now, he's largely been backing it up. The important caveat there is that almost everything we've seen so far has had Gunn's fingerprints directly on it, which means the real test hasn't actually happened yet. That's not shade, that's just reality. And that's why this year, more than last year, more than the next year on paper, is the year the DCU actually has to prove it can be a legitimate cinematic universe without Gunn standing over it, pulling all of its strings all the time. 2026 is the first time this universe is going to be asked in public in front of a very tired audience, okay, but can anyone else do this? Because if the answer to that question is no, then this whole thing becomes a very expensive one-man band. And that's not sustainable for a shared universe, no matter how talented that one man is. Superman succeeding was essential, obviously. The movie was carrying more weight than it probably should have. And if it had stumbled, we'd be having a very different conversation right now. A lot of people like to say it did stumble, and it did not. The conversation we would have had would have started with, well, at least that was a nice try, and ends with another reset in 5 years. But Superman succeeding doesn't finish the job. It just earns the DCU the right to keep going for now. The next phase of the test is whether the universe can expand sideways instead of just forward, whether it can support different tones, genres, creative voices, and levels of weird without collapsing into either chaos or sameness. That's where Supergirl fits right in. And I think this is the first real pressure point of the year, even if people aren't treating it like one yet. On paper, it's already doing the thing the DCU claims it wants to do, which is take a familiar icon and drop her into a very different genre lane. The comparisons to Guardians of the Galaxy are unavoidable, obviously, partly because it's a space story, and partly because of Gunn himself being invested. But there's also partly because once the internet decides two things are similar, that's just it. There's no going back. But the actual source material Supergirl is pulling from has always been darker, harsher, more introspective, and more openly tragic than people expect if their only reference point is she's just a girl Superman. And the early chatter suggesting that the movie leans heavier, more serious, and more emotionally raw than Superman is honestly exactly what the DCU needs at this moment. Not because every project should be dark and miserable, but because tonal flexibility is the entire thesis statement of this universe. If Supergirl comes out and just feels like Guardians with capes, then yeah, that's a big problem. But if it feels like a space western filtered through with grief, identity, and inherited trauma, then suddenly the DCU's argument starts to hold water in a real way. What makes Supergirl even more important is that it's not just her movie. It's quietly doing some of the heaviest lifting in terms of world building that Superman deliberately avoided. Krypton matters. The House of L matters. The whole twist people are still arguing about only works long term if it's contextualized and expanded on, not left hanging in a provocative tweet. Supergirl has the opportunity to add nuance, history, and texture to the mythology instead of flattening it. And if it does that well, it retroactively strengthens Superman instead of undermining it. And that's kind of the pattern here for 2026. None of these projects exist in isolation. And when they're pretending to, every success strengthens the whole. Every misstep adds stress fractures. And that brings us to Lanterns, one that I am very much looking forward to. And the internet went crazy over the logo. Just a logo, and people were going crazy over it. Green Lantern is one of those properties where the mythology is the appeal, and you don't get to half understand it and hope vibes carry you through. Fans have been burned before. The wider audience has baggage, and the choices being made here are bold in a way that's either very smart or very reckless, depending entirely on execution. A grounded, investigative tone is a great look. Treating the ring-slinging cosmic cops as characters first instead of CGI delivery systems is the right instinct. Bringing in mythological players signals confidence instead of fear. All of that is encouraging, of course. The anxiety comes from how central certain relationships and arcs are to the Green Lantern mythos and how easy it is to break the spine of that story if you rush or reassign it without understanding why it even worked in the first place. This is why Lanterns can't be just good TV. It has to feel deliberate. It has to feel like the people making it know exactly where this corner of the universe is going and why it's structured the way it is. Because if Lanterns fumbles, it doesn't just hurt one show, it sends a signal that the DCU world building is vibes based instead of plan based, and that's deadly for the long term trust of the fan. But then we have this thing called Clayface, which is quietly the most interesting wild card in the lineup. On the surface, it's just a straight up horror movie about one of Batman's villains, which already makes it weird in a way that's kind of awesome. But underneath that, it's doing something more important. It's introducing Gotham without Batman. That's either genius or madness, and again, execution decides which one it is. If Clayface nails the atmosphere, the tone, the sense of a city that feels cursed, theatrical, and rotten in a very specific way, then the DCU gets Gotham for free before it ever casts Bruce Wayne. That's huge. That's not the kind of world building you get this early on. And if it doesn't work, then suddenly the absence of Batman stops feeling intentional and starts feeling awkward. And all of this is happening against a backdrop that nobody really wants to talk about too loudly, which is that the business side of DC is not stable. The rumors about studio sales, mergers, competing bids, streaming futures, and shareholder politics are not the fun kind of lore, but they do matter in this case. They matter because they create an invisible clock. Even if nothing changes tomorrow, even if theatrical releases are contractually safe for a few more years, the long-term shape of this universe is not guaranteed in the way Marvel's once felt. That uncertainty is exactly why 2026 matters so much. If the DCU can come out this year with multiple distinct, well-received projects that prove the universe is flexible, resilient, and creatively coherent without being monotonous, then it becomes much harder for corporate turbulence to derail it. Success buys leverage, momentum buys protection. A universe that's clearly working is harder to shove into a streaming only corner or gut in restructuring. There's also the Batman elephant in the room, and you don't need to focus on it to feel its weight. The slow, careful separation between the Elseworlds Batman and the future DCU Batman is understandable, even sensible, but it also means the DCU is being asked to thrive without its most reliable safety net. That's terrifying for the studio, but it's also kind of necessary. If this universe can't stand on its own without immediately deploying Batman as a panic button, then it was never as strong as it needed to be anyway. So yeah, this is the year, not because everything has to be perfect, not because one flop kills the universe, but because patterns start to form here. Audiences decide whether they trust the brand or just tolerate it. Creators decide whether this is a sandbox worth playing in. Executives decide whether this thing is a long term investment or a short term asset to be reshuffled. If Supergirl shows range, if Lantern shows discipline, if Clayface shows confidence, then suddenly the DCU stops feeling like a reboot and starts feeling like an ecosystem. And once you get there, the conversation changes. It stops being, will this work? And starts being, okay, where can this go? Where will this take us? I am in. Strap in. Let's go. That's the confidence between a universe that survives and one that actually lasts. I want to thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it. If you like this video, feel free to hit that like button. And until next time, may you be the master of your own universe.